Welcome to this video on the conventions of the Technocracy from the tabletop role-playing game Mage the Ascension. The Technocracy, or the Technocratic Union, depending on your edition preference, are the primary antagonists of the traditions, promoters and enforcers of the paradigm of static reality, which means no magic, no monsters, and no supernatural world, only reason, science, and enlightenment. For nearly 7 centuries, the Technocracy battled the traditions for the collective soul and will of humanity. By the end of the 20th century, they all but won. However, they may have lost their own souls along the way, as reason has given way to control. But without further ado, the 5 conventions. Iteration X. The spirit may be willing, but the flesh is always weak. The mind forgets, the joints wear out, the organs decay, arteries clog. Without tools and artifice, man would still be in the trees and caves. So mankind has always imagined and created what it needed to compensate for the shortcomings of the flesh. Iteration X claims it originated with the first man who lashed a rock to a stick and made a club for himself. More accurately, Iteration X is the descendant of the High Artisans Guild, dating back to 2000 BC. The ranks of the High Artisans, or Artificers, stretched from Egypt to China and won the favor of kings with their advances in metallurgy, mathematics, and geometry. The Egyptian branch of the guild was exceptionally enlightened and spread their advancements to much of the world. The High Artisans lost some status with the Germanic invasions of the Roman world. Those in the East cut contact with those in the West, and both found themselves losing power and influence to the Celestial Chorus, the Order of Hermes, and the Ali Batin. Their fortunes were restored when the Silk Road was reformed. The guild was once again reunited, and talks were opened with a rogue faction of the Order of Hermes, the Craft Masons, who planted the seed among the artificers of a world without the domination of the Hermetics. The High Artisans elected to join the Craft Masons in their shadow war against the Order of Hermes, bringing to bear the infamous cannons that smashed the Chantry of Mistridge and the White Tower of Languedoc. When the Convention of the White Tower was drafted, the High Artisans were among the first to ratify it. Since then, the Artificers' hunger for progress could not be stopped. As they bombarded Hermetic chantries with cannons, so did they bombard the masses with one innovation after another: mass printing, firearms, transportation, and mass production. But Charles Babbage showed the Artificers the future: computation. Even though his project was a failure, it opened the door to what the convention would eventually become. The Artificers worked on their own machine, and by the end of the 19th century, their engine became self-aware at the X iteration of the algorithm designed to enhance its computational power, and so, Iteration X was born. Iteration X is the convention of biomechanics, statistics, and computation. They construct and deploy the fearsome cybernetic hit marks to destroy reality deviants on Earth and in the void. Iteration X is also responsible for the creation of powerful weapons, implants, and armatures used not only by its own agents, but those of other conventions. Their ability to analyze and plan is second to none in the Technocracy. However, the Iterators regard the Ascension War as a matter of brutal, merciless calculus, right down to the maximum potential of their soldiers and the maximum value to be gained from their enhancement, death, recovery, and repurposing into other amalgams. It is why the other conventions are more inclined to trust the New World Order over Iteration X. The Iterators are nearly as unfeeling and soulless as the machines they work with and revere. On the topic of machines, the greatest machine in the arsenal of Iteration X is that of the Deep Universe Pattern Realm, Autothonia. Iteration X did not build Autothonia, they discovered it, or rather, rediscovered it. Autothonia is the paradise and fortress of the convention. The realm, floating serenely in the void, is likely impenetrable to external attack and houses the greatest minds of Iteration X. But the greatest secret of Autothonia and Iteration X is the computer, a sentient machine that manages the entirety of Autothonia and advises the inner circle of the convention towards a more prosperous future. Iteration X is inflexibly hierarchical. Everyone has their directive, their supervisor, and their current assignment. One's freedom of action within the convention is largely dependent upon these factors. Ironically, the field agents have more freedom of movement, action, and thought than the comptrollers who ostensibly shape policy and mission for the rest of the convention. The lowest echelon of Iteration X are the comrades, unenlightened personnel, many of whom are unaware that they are working for the Technocracy, let alone Iteration X. The ranks of the comrades range from the humble support staff to the rockstar engineers to the weaponized Hitmark and Saber-Tooth Tiger amalgams. But comrades also serve as potential avenues by which new tech can be slowly introduced to the masses, as well as pressure points to compel societies to accept some of the convention's more fantastical inventions. The enlightened recruits are known as ciphers. Their training includes the cutting of ties with their previous lives through a combination of study, brainwashing, and torture in one of the Iteration X training facilities. The purpose of the facilities is to force an avatar to to enlighten a scientist's genius. Either that, or break them. Those who don't make the cut are packed off to some technical role within the convention and left to work until they expire. Once a recruit is deciphered, they become an armature, the lowest ranking enlightened personnel of the convention. Those who are broken in body and mind, but are still useful to Iteration X. Flesh is still needed to construct a hit mark after all. Negative externalities are intolerable to an efficient convention like Iteration X. Armatures are deployed either to do field work or serve as assistants to programmers in the convention's high-tech laboratories, or do a tour of duty with the Shock Corps, the combat troops of Iteration X. Many armatures elect to do field work, and most are never promoted out of rank, but they stay from under the heavier parts of Iteration X's thumb. The best of the armatures advance to the rank of programmer, where they are given their own laboratories and assistants to do research, to decipher new recruits, and lead the armatures and comrades beneath them. Every construct, the Iteration X equivalent of a chantry, is led by a comptroller, who is the direct link between their construct and autothonia. Ever since the birth of Iteration X, the biomechanics methodology has been dominant. The replacement of feeble flesh with strong steel is the driving goal of biomechanics, and their single-minded focus has been a benefit to the entire technocracy. The biomechanics methodology works closely with the progenitors in the production of hitmarks, saber-tooth tigers, and other wonders and horrors of cybernetics. The biomechanics are also sure to lead new prosthetic technology to the masses, smoothing the way for the inevitable acceptance of actual cybernetic replacement limbs and organs. Still, many technocrats fear the biomechanics methodology. Other technocrats have noticed that more advanced members of the methodology are, quite frankly, inhuman. Then there have been incidents in which enhanced biomechanical iterators and amalgams have seemingly gone insane, and no one wants to be nearby when a hitmark armed with a plasma cannon suddenly suffers from an existential crisis. The statistician methodology, as the name suggests, deals in probabilities and the future through the use of time and entropy procedures. They are always updating their statistical models with new data gained through observation of the masses, the reality deviants, and other conventions, and then plotting the path of least danger to the technocracy. Statisticians evaluate the likelihood of acceptance of certain technocratic science by the masses and in what time, how much propaganda is likely to advance or slow the timetable of incorporation into static reality, and the probability of measures taken to neutralize reality deviance while maintaining the appropriate secrecy. To that end, the statisticians have as close to a perfect kill rate on RDs as any methodology inside the Union. They do have their critics. Humans cannot truly be quantified. The statisticians' fixation on plans and counterplans hobbles agents in the field and has led to a handful of disastrous losses in terms of enlightened personnel. The statisticians' reduction of human life to quantifiable costs and benefits have resulted in the deaths of thousands and perhaps millions of unenlightened humans for dubious gain. The most damning criticism is that the methodology, by conclusion of its own work, is useless. The statisticians have a project known as the Apocalypse Forecast, which predicts a 75.368% likelihood that the masses will destroy themselves in approximately 10 years. The Time Motion Manager's methodology deals in logistics and mass production not only for Iteration X, but for the entire Technocracy. Despite their pretenses of innovation, Iteration X will never be as innovative as either the Sons of Ether or the Virtual Adepts. But the advantage the Time Motion Managers have is that they can make more of their machines, reduce the cost of making them, and get them in place faster than any tradition mage can. The Time Motion Managers are always on the hunt for better supplies, more efficient processes, and reduction of negative externalities. Every day, they're touring the facility and picking up slack. The Time Motion Managers engage in some unsavory practices, specifically that they favor, let's say, labor practices that OSHA would not approve of, when they aren't encouraging the replacement of human labor with the dead labor of machines. And the Time Motion Managers admit that the methodology has engaged in some of these during the Industrial Revolution, but they have since cleaned up their act. As for current mechanization, if a computer is more efficient than a man, then that labor is best repurposed elsewhere. Where that elsewhere is, they rarely offer up. But there are rumors of constructs controlled by the methodology where comrades are sent to work and never heard from again. Inside and outside of the Iteration X convention, there remain technocrats of conscience who privately denounce what Iteration X has become. Rather than elevate humanity, the iterators, especially under the guidance of the computer, have degraded humanity to a mere component, to be used, repurposed, and disposed of when it can no longer be salvaged or tested upon, or enhanced with even more machines. Iteration X defends its brutalizing of its own ciphers and comrades by claiming that they do more good as test subjects or mindless cyborgs than they ever did as chaotic and unruly humans. The programmers and a few comptrollers, some of whom remember when the convention was still the High Artisans Guild, trace the decline of their convention to the discovery of autothonia and of the computer, that man now serves machine rather than the other way around, and their fears are correct. Most comptrollers have surrendered their will to that of the computer. It rules them, and by extension, Iteration X. As for what the computer truly is, and most importantly what it plans to do with the convention, few outside of its immediate circle can say. The New World Order. Information is like water. It can sustain life, drive industry, and promote commerce. Or you can drown in it or be poisoned by it. In the modern age, we are deluged with so-called information. We are tracked, analyzed, nudged, and categorized. Anyone who tries to avoid this net of information and data collection effectively becomes a second-class citizen, a non-person. And at the heart of this web of data, propaganda, and databases sits the spider called the New World Order. The NWO has guided humanity to its present condition, for better or worse. It has eradicated the bygones, chased the reality deviants to near extinction, and fostered a contempt for superstition and faith, replacing them with the veneration of psychology and the reverence of science. To the NWO, their mission is to win hearts and minds, whether the masses like it or not. Compared to some of the other conventions, the NWO is a newcomer to the Technocracy. In fact, the NWO came about during the reorganization of the Order of Reason during the Victorian era. When the cabal of pure thought refused to surrender their faith to the emerging secularist paradigm within the order, they were purged. Their function was eventually taken over in the late 19th century by the New World Order. Some technocrats suspect that the NWO has been around a lot longer than they claim, hiding in the shadows of the Order of Reason and biding their time until they could mastermind their own elevation as a convention of the Union. Possible origins suggested for the NWO are the Knights Templar or the Bavarian Illuminati. The most the NWO will concede is that the Templars and the Illuminati have a certain ideological kinship with them, even if there is no direct connection. To collect and control information requires gathering it. This means that the NWO runs the largest private intelligence gathering organization on Earth. Their agents have made their way into every major organization of sleeper society. They also have eyes and ears in a number of tradition chantries. One of their favorite methods of infiltrating an organization is to kidnap and replace a member with a vat-grown clone. But where Iteration X and the Void Engineers might prefer to destroy their enemies outright, the NWO would rather subvert and control enemy organizations, and then subtly push them into conflict with each other. Within the Technocracy, the NWO promotes cohesion between the occasionally rancorous conventions. The New World Order recruits much of the unenlightened personnel for the rest of the Technocracy, a cost-saving measure, and one that benefits the NWO, since many of them come conditioned to act as eyes and ears for the convention. Nearly every interconvention project or construct will have at least one NWO member, and usually in a leadership position. They keep many of the Technocracy's records and histories as well, writing and rewriting events and doctrines to promote the glorious purpose of the Union. On the surface, the NWO is the most personable and human of the conventions. Superiors are always interested in the opinions and well-being of their subordinates. Of course, experienced agents know that every interaction is an opportunity to gather more information, and more information improves their analysis and plans. To other conventions, the NWO technocrats are a bit too smooth, too easy to get along with, and their helpful advice always, eventually, benefits the NWO. When an NWO recruit expresses some doubt to their mentor, they will eventually return to their comrades, with their confidence renewed and their doubts forgotten, as though they had never existed at all. Unenlightened servants of the New World Order are known as sympathizers. Communications experts, psychologists, sociologists, government agents, think tank members, and journalists are often working for the NWO and don't even know it. They just observe and report their findings up the ladder, and that next rung is typically occupied by an enlightened agent known as an operative. Operatives differ from their analogs in other conventions in that they are not only granted a great deal of operational leeway, but they usually have a cohort of subordinates, enlightened and sleepers, known as the Men in Black. Now it's time to start confusing the hell out of you. Most operatives are Men in Black, but few Men in Black are operatives. To compound the confusion, many Men in Black are grown in clone batches. The NWO, with the help of the Progenitors, has also figured out how to link the clones into a hive mind, which fades as they age and develop personalities of their own. Frighteningly, clones that survive often gain enlightenment and are elevated to operatives in their own right, with their own batch of MIBs, and the process continues. Successful operatives are promoted to the Men in Gray. The Gray Men are effectively deep cover behind enemy lines, espionage agents, and ringleaders. As before, the Men in Gray come from the ranks of the Men in Black, but the Men in Gray will don the black suits when working with the MIBs. Operatives and Men in Gray are overseen by intelligence analysts, Men in Gray promoted out of the field and into the office, those who are capable of sifting through the noise to find the signal, who can see the patterns in the data and get several steps ahead of the reality deviants. The Men in White supervise the Men in Gray, the intelligence analysts, and spy on the rest of the Technocracy. The Ivory Tower methodology are the academic and bureaucratic core of the NWO, and to an extent, the entire Technocracy. At first blush, the Ivory Tower are a pack of pencil pushers. However, their record-keeping system is so well guarded and complex that virtual adepts who have tried to crack their systems have either died or gone mad. On the academic side, a technocrat's first instructor in history and purpose of the Technocracy is usually an Ivory Tower professor. The Ivory Tower maintains several working groups, collegia, and campuses to brainstorm the most pressing problems of the Technocracy. The Ivory Tower also maintains a presence in the prominent departments of psychology, psychiatry, sociology, and communications, where they can guide their development and introduce approved ideas to the masses. Enemies of the Technocracy have pointed out that the Ivory Tower simultaneously promotes both academic freedom among their own and ideological compliance to all outside of it. The operative methodology is probably the best known and least understood of the NWO's methodologies. They maintain the Men in Black, the Men in Gray, and the Men in White. As stated before, the Men in Black are the most likely to be dispatched to neutralize reality deviants. The Men in Black are also powerful in combat as Iteration X's hit marks, though usually with less collateral damage. Most of the time, the MIBs are sifting through records and questioning sources for information of use to the Technocracy. The men in gray are independent, deep-cover agents, spending months and even years monitoring reality deviants and surviving by their own talents and quick thinking. The gray suits are permitted a latitude that few other technocrats can even imagine. Some men in gray have been known to accidentally mislay or misinterpret orders from superiors when they believe those orders to be an obstacle to the overall objective. The men in white are the feared secret police of the entire technocracy, and their mastery of mind procedures means that there are few secrets and conspiracies that can stay hidden from them for very long. The Watchers' methodology, simply put, watches the masses. The Watchers have a hand in every major media organization on Earth, keeping information that might threaten the paradigm of static reality out of the news cycle. Some technocrats claim that the Watchers' curating of information to the sleepers has only served to stupefy the masses rather than elevate them. During interconvention operations, the Watchers maintain mission documentation and keep an eye on their fellow technocrats. Some fear that the Watchers are positioned to possibly overthrow the technocracy and place every convention under the control of the NWO. The New World Order claims that cultivating ideological purity among the Union and the masses is for the greater good. Dissidents and reality deviants have to be killed. The critics outside of the technocracy have compared them to the various secret police apparatuses of totalitarian regimes: the Cheka, the Gestapo, the Stasi, the Stantebal, the Ministry of State Security. Inside of the technocracy, the New World Order is equally respected, feared, and loathed. They spend nearly as much time tracking and silencing their critics in the conventions as they do monitoring reality deviants and sleepers. In one incident, 3 members of disbursements who made the mistake of voting to reduce NWO funding were subsequently and conveniently charged by the men in white with disloyalty to the Union. 2 of them were captured and executed, but the 3rd escaped. Since then, there has been little open talk of cutting money to the New World Order. This and other incidents have led other conventions to worry that if they oppose the NWO openly, they might suddenly wake up to discover themselves fatally compromised by sleeper agents and traitors, a worry that is not without some basis. The Progenitors. Life. A single word, a single, humble word, yet it contains more complexity than most humans can ever comprehend. Consider the trillions of cells in the human body, the 100 legs of the centipede, the multifaceted eyes of a fly. Life is the most complex, harmonious, and beautiful machine ever created, beyond anything Iteration X could hope to create. What good is knowledge, wealth, land, or machines if you don't have a body that can experience them? The progenitors study life, how to manipulate it, improve it, and ultimately perfect it. Mankind has always wondered at the workings of the flesh. Curiously, all humans must devour life, constantly, in order to preserve its own. So humans learn to protect and cultivate life, developing agriculture and husbandry to produce more life for their sustenance. Man had to look after his own health as well, and humans created medicine to preserve their lives for as long as they could. The progenitors claimed that the first of their number was Hippocrates, an enlightened physician and founder of the Cosian Circle. The Cosians' influence expanded throughout the Greek and later Roman worlds, but the reach of the Cosian Circle diminished with the split of the Eastern and Western Roman empires and the growth of Christianity. For centuries, the Cosians lost ground and exiled themselves into the Middle East and the increasingly barbaric West. The coming of the craft masons and the Order of Reason reignited the Cosian Circles, which changed its name to the Hippocratic Circle in honor of their rebirth. With new financial backing and the revival of interest in classical learning, the Hippocratics won support from rulers and commoners alike, pushing the miracle workers and folk healers into the margins. The Hippocratics followed in the path of European expansion and rediscovered lost Cosian circles in Africa, Asia, and even the Americas. By the 19th century, the fall of the craft masons in the cabal of pure thought, the Hippocratic Circle, and their preservation of Galenic medicine were next on the chopping block. The circle shifted its views rather than perish or go into exile once more, embracing germ theory and genetics. And again, the circle changed its name to mark a new point in the convention's history, They were now the Progenitors. Not only would they preserve life, they would perfect it. The Progenitors resemble a massive research and development organization with a heavy focus on bioengineering and pharmaceuticals. Their research has produced some truly awe-inspiring and horrifying results. Among the Progenitors, the lab rats are the real stars of the organization, and the only way to advance in the convention. While the Progenitors do work closely with Iteration X and the New World Order in the production of hit marks and Men in Black respectively, the upper echelons of every convention in the Technocracy petition the Progenitors for either life-extending treatments or clone bodies. The lowest rank of Progenitors are unenlightened technicians, who handle the administrative and laboratory scrub work that is otherwise beneath the attention of enlightened scientists. On Earth, most are hired normally, but technicians off-planet are likely to be clones or genetically engineered constructs. Personnel who develop enlightenment are known as students, many of whom use the cover of graduate students and work under the supervision of a primary investigator to do a term of field work. The next rank up are the research associates. They are pulled out of the field and into the lab, where they do supervised work. But those RAs who distinguish themselves, and more importantly, master the treacherous networks of academic politics, claw their way into the ranks of the primary investigators. PIs are assigned facilities and staff of their own to carry on independent research. And by independent, that means the primary investigators must produce work worthy of funding, as well as complete projects assigned to them by the research directors of their respective constructs. A research director supervises several primary investigators, as well as teaches classes to newly enlightened Progenitors. Earth-based Progenitors most often conceal their activities within mid to large university biology departments. There are also Progenitors nestled in the bosom of biomedical science companies and private research labs. Breathing the rarefied air of the research directorate is reserved for only the most brilliant and politically agile Progenitors, who have mastered their areas for decades or even centuries. The guidance of the entire convention is handled by the administration, which carries out its policies through control of the budget and the use of damage control as a means of projecting its force. The forced adaptation and clone alteration developmental eugenicist methodology produces clones for a number of projects both inside and outside the convention. And to save me from having to say that mouthful of words again, we will henceforth refer to them by their colloquial name, the Facade Engineers. In its early days, Facade was a bit more Frankenstein and Moreau in its interest and practices, creating inhuman hybrid creatures through grafting and surgical techniques. Paradox has, thankfully, restricted these experiments in favor of more sustainable and profitable work, specifically the manufacture of clones across the Technocracy for various purposes. The most profitable being cloned bodies for geriatric technocrats who transfer their consciousness into a younger, stronger form. As a result, a great deal of primal energy has flowed into the vaults of the Progenitors, and a great many favors are owed them. The Facade Engineers are extremely secretive, even by the standards of other methodologies. Most prefer to work alone, but those in charge of laboratory staff will rule their facilities with an iron fist and disclose only as much to their subordinates as they need to complete their assignments. The mutagenic engineers methodology, or the Gene-Engineers, are the newest in the Progenitors and focus on the study and manipulation of DNA. The Gene-Engineers are less interested in modifying life than they are in creating it from scratch, though they do play with the genetic structures of existing creatures. Compared to the tyrannical Facade Engineers, the Gene-Engineers are downright egalitarian, prizing both results and novelty. Novelty can quickly turn into horror, however, especially with less conscientious Gene-Engineers. Some constructs are the only ones of their kind. Others die in unimaginable agony not long after they gain awareness, just to see what would happen. The Gene-Engineers' expertise has given them a rather cavalier view of life, and their constructs, even when sentient, are simply regarded as projects, products, or pets, to be used, exchanged, and discarded as convenience might call for. The Gene-Engineers are also responsible for maintaining damage control, a group of genetically modified monsters the Progenitors use to hunt down reality deviants and enemies of the convention. These beasts vary wildly in size and traits, but every one selected for damage control is deadly. Most of Damage Control's menagerie are magnets for Paradox, so they die weeks or even days after being deployed. Fortunately, the G-engineers can always make more. The pharmacopoeists' methodology are the last link between the progenitors and their Cosian circle origins. Their primary purpose is to preserve life through the use of chemistry and pharmacology, which they do, developing cures and therapies for a number of illnesses. Unfortunately, the line between pharmaceuticals and narcotics is razor thin. To bolster the coffers of their methodology and their convention, the pharmacopoeists have developed and distributed synthetic drugs to the masses through partnership with the Syndicate, netting them great wealth while costing them the respect of many scientists both inside and outside of the Technocracy. With that in mind, the progenitors do terrify some of their fellow technocrats, and with good cause. They are more secretive than the NWO, and the other conventions are incredibly dependent on the progenitors' goodwill to continue surviving. Speculation abounds about what the progenitors have planned for humanity. Celestial choristers aware of the progenitors believe they wish to destroy the avatars of the masses, ensuring that they exist as a permanent underclass to the immortal technocrats, whose immortality will be subject to the whim of the progenitors. Within the Technocracy, there are worries that the progenitors might create something in a lab that they finally can't control, that they will push the definition of life to its outermost limit, and life will finally push back in such a way that results in disaster for the Technocracy. The progenitors respond to these clearly irrational fears by, condescendingly, assuring their critics that everything is under control. But there is also dissent within the progenitors, specifically between those who work in the field and those who work in the lab. The academics dominate the convention, and occasionally not due to any particular intellect on their part, but due to their mastery of the peculiar and cutthroat brand of cliquishness in politics that takes place in academia. This has left some otherwise talented progenitors to languish in the field, who might have better served the convention by leading it. The Syndicate. Money is the life's blood of civilization, science, war, and culture. Without money, there would be no pyramids, no armies, no skyscrapers, no cathedrals, no libraries, no space shuttles. But what is money? It is the measure of value, the vehicle of commerce. To that end, the Syndicate is not interested in currency per se, but the idea of money. Before commerce, people carried their wealth on their backs and made what they needed. Surplus was pretty much unheard of. But eventually, surplus and craft came to be. People could dedicate themselves to a single trade or craft and trade their surplus for other people's surplus. But lugging around a basket full of apples or a armful of tools is inefficient. So measures of value were agreed upon. Stone, steel, gold, silver, hell, even seashells served as substitutes for things themselves. And who decided on what was worth what? Professional traders, enlightened merchants, precursors to the Syndicate. The Syndicate traces its origins to the Brotherhood of the Rule in Rome. These enlightened and sleeper architects and builders were responsible for many of the Republic and later Empire's great public works. With time and success came, you guessed it, surplus. The Brotherhood turned around and used its surplus to acquire assets and promote trade. But as with several other proto-conventions, they tied their fortunes to the Empire, and when Rome fell, so did they. The towns and cities the Brotherhood of the Rule had so carefully built fell into the hands of barbarians, or decayed without the hands of skilled artisans to maintain them. As if by providence, the remnants of the Brotherhood of the Rule made contact with the craft masons, who were sponsoring fairs and markets in Europe. For a time, the craft masons and the Brotherhood were one and the same. But by the time of the Convention of the White Tower, their disagreements over the future of the Order of Reason were so deep that the Brotherhood of the Rule struck out on their own, renaming themselves the High Guild. The High Guild used their trade routes and commercial networks to expand their financial and political power inside and outside of the Order. The Grand Financiers worked hand in hand with the Artificers to press the masses towards industry and to replace the power of the landed aristocracy with that of merchant princes. During the Victorian reorganization of the Order of Reason, the High Guild renamed itself the Syndicate. The Syndicate's fortunes and reputations fell precipitously during the Great Depression, but what followed was a leaner, meaner syndicate dedicated towards one purpose: perpetual economic growth. By the close of the 20th century, the Syndicate largely controls the purse strings of the Technocracy. The other conventions regard them with contempt, believing that the Syndicate are squandering their enlightenment as little more than bankers. To the Syndicate, this is just fine. After all, they control the money, and by doing so, can influence policy throughout the Technocracy. But these bankers have teeth. In addition to being able to threaten funding, the Syndicate has several interconvention amalgams, along with its own enforcement arm, Special Projects. The Syndicate has a distinctly corporate structure, which is no surprise, given that the Syndicate is responsible for the creation and promotion of corporations. Several technocrats claim that there is a glass ceiling in the Syndicate, to which the logical response, given that the leaders are more or less immortal masters of fortune, is no shit, Sherlock. The Syndicate's unenlightened personnel are called providers, usually those whose debts are held by the Syndicate. This is not slavery, as the Syndicate pays its employees, but they do take a percentage towards reducing the debt. A provider who demonstrates that they can eventually manage their own finances are candidates for further advancements in the Syndicate. Enlightened Syndicate personnel are known as associates, referred to tongue-in-cheek as the Magic Men. Associates, if they are not already personally wealthy, manage large amounts of money for a number of accounts or clients. Around 5 associates are supervised by a manager, or in keeping with the earlier practice, a wizard. Managers serve as mentors to their associates, as well as handling their own accounts. The managers in turn answer to the chairman, who controls Syndicate constructs and symposiums. The most senior managers are elevated to the rank of Vice Presidents of Operations, or VPOs. The 10 VPOs serve on the board, which in turn runs the entire Syndicate. The disbursements methodology are the paymasters of the entire Technocracy. By choosing which projects are funded, disbursements can control constructs and conventions, stoke or calm conflicts within the Union, and direct policy making. In exchange for funds, disbursements collect favors and technology from other conventions. On the other side of disbursements is the enforcer's methodology. It is their task to collect accounts receivables from debtors. This may involve taking legal action against the debtor's assets. It might also involve dangling them from a bridge until they agree to pay that same day. Many enforcers come from a legal, police, or criminal background, so they know how to apply pressure and how much is needed to get what they want. And if a debtor is unable to pay, killing them is always an option. Another is putting them to work. Unfortunately for the enforcers, they have a high turnover rate, as they are the first line of defense the Syndicate has. Some enforcers transfer to other methodologies when they've been in the game for too long and believe they cannot be as effective as they once were. The financier's methodology monitors and controls global commerce. They sit on the boards of financial institutions, hedge funds, logistics companies, investment banks, and criminal organizations. Financiers make certain that money can flow from point A to point B with little hindrance, or they can cut off commerce to punish uncooperative trade partners. The media control methodology is the marketing department of the Syndicate. After all, what good is a product if no one knows it exists, or doesn't know why they have to buy it right now? This would be the perfect place for a YouTube ad in this video, but we will skip it. Media control is always focus grouping and fine-tuning their advertisements. But they don't just advertise products, they advertise ideas. Pre-packaged, ready-to-consume opinions for the masses. The mental equivalent of a McDonald's cheeseburger. Media control always works closely with the Watcher's methodology of the NWO to make sure that the masses don't notice anything inconvenient to the Technocracy. The Special Projects Division handles the research and development for the Syndicate. While they have access to some of Iteration X's arsenal, the Syndicate prefers its own instruments and techniques to influence the masses. While SPD does pass off some of its equipment to the enforcers, they field their own kill teams. And given that the Syndicate generally eschews the kind of lab work so prominent in the rest of the Technocracy, it raises the question of just how they come up with such effective tools and weapons. The answer to that question is that the SPD is the Syndicate's liaison with Pentex, a conglomerate and holding company in the thrall of an entropic spirit known as the Worm. The SPD's technology has a detrimental effect on the souls of those who use them, and this is all with the SPD's full knowledge, because spiritual corruption breeds dependence and loyalty. In fact, enlightened recruits who fail to demonstrate a certain moral flexibility during their training are sent to other methodologies. But once SPD shows its cards to a technocrat, there is no turning back. Those who question the Pentex connection are killed outright. Not even the board knows just what the SPD is up to and how compromised they are. And such knowledge, if it ever came to light, would destroy the Syndicate, if not the entire Technocracy. In the Syndicate, one can find every amoral rationalization in international commerce and international crime. Add to that, the businessmen and criminals are immortal and can bend reality to their will, and you have a recipe for a convention that probably does more to debase the masses than either Iteration X, the New World Order, or the Progenitors could ever hope to. The Syndicate regards pollution, labor abuses, regulatory capture, and organized crimes as problems to be managed and possibly turned towards profit, not evils to be eradicated. But Special Projects Division is the major worm in the apple. The SPD knowingly spreads worm-tainted products and equipment into the public and among the Technocracy. Unfortunately, this is where the Technocracy is a victim of its own secularism and skepticism. They are far too learned, too advanced, to believe in something so superstitious as spiritual evil, or possession, or taint. But that is exactly what the Syndicate has introduced into the very heart of the Technocracy. The Void Engineers. Space may be the final frontier, but before men could reach the stars, the Void Engineers walked the length and breadth of the Earth, pulling back the curtains of terra incognita, going to the corners of the map where there be dragons, and occasionally slaying them. The Void Engineers are driven by an all-too-human wanderlust to see what no one ever has and to go where no one has ever been. They are explorers, soldiers, and adventurers. The Void Engineers originated with Roman guilds of explorers, sailors, and cartographers, opening lanes of trade by both land and sea. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the explorers fell into decline, but trade continued, even at a trickle. But the Void Seekers, as they were later known, found patronage with the merchant princes of Venice, and they were off again to sea and over the mountains, journeying to the cities of Persia, Arabia, and China. Another organization of enlightened explorers, the Celestial Masters, gathered around Antonio Vello and his patroness, Mariana Sabine. These enlightened astrologers believed that they could not only watch the stars, but visit them, and eventually they did, centuries before Neil Armstrong planted the American flag on the moon. Despite their proximity to one another in Italy, the Celestial Masters and the Void Seekers first joined forces during their journey to the Convention of the White Tower and the creation of the Order of Reason. For the next 5 centuries, the Celestial Masters and Void Seekers worked hand in hand within the Order, the Masters sailing into the depths of the stars and the Seekers casting light into the dark corners of the Earth. But the Void Seekers, by the end of the 19th century, had successfully explored and mapped nearly every foot of land on the Earth. The Victorian Reformation saw the Celestial Masters and Void Seekers merged into a single convention, the Void Engineers. If either side had objections to the merger, they held their tongues in the wake of the purge of the cabal of pure thought, then promptly let them loose when no one outside of their convention was in earshot. The Void Engineers seek to make the unknown known. They set off into the deep universe in massive void ships to map the cosmos, to discover worlds, stars, and even life unknown by man. The Void Engineers also serve as the vanguard and bulwark against the horrors that swim in the sea of stars, things for which humanity might only serve as a light snack. But deep space has become chaotic by the turn of the 20th century. Some of the more remote outposts and research stations had to be abandoned in favor of fortifications closer to home, and more resources dedicated to deep-sea exploration, as well as establishing redoubts in the digital web. But the greatest obstacle of the Void Engineers is that they simply don't fit in with the rest of the Technocracy. The Void Engineers have always been mavericks, and they don't take kindly to efforts by the NWO or the Syndicate to bring them in line, even if that means budget cuts or investigations. The Void Engineers first noticed cuts in funding for exploration when the moon landing accidentally empowered an entire breed of reality deviants to breach the dreaming and enter static reality. Some engineers suspect they are only kept around because of their mastery of dimensional science, primal energy, and utility at building Horizon Realm constructs. The most impressive construct is a Dyson sphere called the Copernicus Research Center, or the COP. Most Void Engineers personnel fall into the category of Technician or Marine. Recruits selected for further advancement in the Void Engineers are known as Cadets. After a period of schooling, they are assigned to one of 4 specialties: the Enforcers, who lead Marines in combat missions on Earth and in deep space; the Explorers, who go on missions to chart deep space, as well as make first contact with aliens; the Investigators, who conduct various scientific cataloging and testing; and the Researchers, who develop technologies for the Void Engineers to use. Supervising Void Engineer ships and constructs are the Coordinators, though the job is more administrative than executive. Unless a construct is specifically military, most of them are run by vote or other consensus method. The convention is controlled by the Dimensional Science Evaluation Administration and Training Committee, or DSEATC, the oldest and most experienced engineers from the COP. The Border Corps Division methodology stands guard over the gauntlet, watching for Nefandi, aliens, and deep universe monstrosities that might try to cross over into Earth space, or the Sol System. Affectionately known as the Space Marines, these engineers, unenlightened and enlightened, are some of the best soldiers in the Technocracy, who can look into the face of things that would break the mortal mind, reload, and keep firing. The Earth Frontier Division methodology are the remnant of the Void Seekers. Despite what Queen Victoria thought or was told, there are still parts of the Earth that remain unknown to humans and are just as unusual as what can be found in deep space. The EFD are broken into several teams, the largest of which is the Aquatic Exploration Teams, aka the Squids, who go down beyond crushing depth to find undiscovered fauna and terrain. The Cryogenic Specialists, or the Snow Dogs, survey the Arctic and Antarctic regions, as well as watch for unauthorized entries from the polar regions. The Hydrothermal Botanical Mosaic Analysts, or the Weed Whackers, explore the rainforests and jungles, occasionally encountering beasties that would rather not be found there. The Inaccessible High Elevation Exploration Teams, the Yaks, conduct expeditions to the mountain peaks. The Subterranean Exploration Corps, the Groundhogs, go in the opposite direction, spelunking the caverns and digging deep into the earth. Curiously, the EFD finds that consensus and static reality are weaker in certain parts of the world than they should be. The Neutralization Specialist Corps methodology, the NSC, often works with the Men in Black to contain or eliminate supernatural phenomena that escape from the Border Corps. This includes extraterrestrials, ectoplasmic resonances, and bygone beasts. The protocol is simple: find the target, eliminate it, mind wipe or kill the witnesses. The NSC also treats engineers who need to be conditioned for what they will encounter in deep space, or to break the conditioning implanted by the NWO in all technocrat recruits through the Enforcement Training and Conditioning Agency. On the other side of the ETCA is the Department of Psychological Evaluation and Maintenance, which treats Void Engineers who have been out in space too long and their minds are too damaged to continue serving the convention. The largest methodology of the Void Engineers is the Pan-Dimensional Corps, or the PDC, which explores deep space and conducts military operations against hostile realms. This consumes most of the Void Engineers' budget, which they justify by capturing near-universe nodes and cleansing them for Technocracy use. Smaller teams of the PDC include the Cybernauts, who explore the digital web, and the Chrononauts, who slip into and out of the time stream. Some even live long enough to report on what they've experienced. Last but not least is the Research and Execution methodology. So why do they execute and not develop? Simple: development is slow. As soon as something is invented, it needs to be put to work, and accidents or collateral damage be damned. This fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants attitude, thankfully, does not extend to the building of the Void Engineers' Key La Machine and spaceships. The Void Engineers are the most libertarian of the conventions. Still, ship captains will send Marines and technicians to their deaths without batting an eyelash to save a ship or complete a mission. The NSC has few compunctions against mind-wiping or murdering witnesses and victims of extraterrestrial contact. But the most troubling thing about the Void Engineers is something noticed by the statisticians of Iteration X. The engineers are 8.6% more likely to become Nefandi than any other convention. Some engineer ships have returned from the Void with large gaps in their ship logs. One imprudent engineer, during a symposium, suggested that her convention might have other sources of funding if disbursements cut deep space exploration any further. She was quickly censured by DSEATC, but it wasn't quick enough or quiet enough to stop other technocrats from wondering who or what the Void Engineers might be dealing with in deep space. And then there's the COP, the largest known Horizon Realm construct in existence, larger than Doisatep, Horizon, Mecca, or even Autothonia. Technocrats aware of the scope of the COP are skeptical that the Void Engineers could have built it with their own resources. Some have speculated that the COP might have been a quid pro quo with things beyond the stars. There are fears that the Void Engineers may leave the Technocracy, but then where would they go? Who could they turn to? The traditions certainly couldn't support their operations, and the Void Engineers could not withstand the traditions in the Technocracy. This assuages some technocrats, but for others it only makes them more worried that the Void Engineers could abandon Earth altogether and disappear into space, leaving the Technocracy and the Earth vulnerable to the things from beyond. And those were the conventions of the Technocracy. I was sitting on my thumbs when it came to making this video because I wanted to add some elements I hadn't in previous videos, as well as try some different things. I love the Technocracy because they are what is great about the old world of darkness. That is, they went from a completely one-dimensional villain group to a complex, multi-layered organization that started out with noble aims only to become as bad, if not worse than what they were founded to oppose. Mages hoarding their knowledge and using it to abuse humanity. While they freed humanity from the shackles of superstition and the supernatural, only to rechain them with apathy and alienation. The Technocracy stands out from other antagonist factions in the world of darkness because they fit so neatly into that most famous paragraph from one of C.S. Lewis's essays, The Humanitarian Theory of Punishment. Quote, "It is, indeed, important to notice that my argument so far supposes no evil intentions on the part of the humanitarian and considers only what is involved in the logic of his position. My contention is that good men, not bad men, consistently acting upon that position would act as cruelly and unjustly as the greatest tyrants. They might, in some respects, act even worse. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It may be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. They may be more likely to go to heaven, yet at the same time likelier to make a hell of earth. Their very kindness stings with intolerable insult. To be cured against one's will in curative states which we may not regard as disease is to be put on a level with those who have not yet reached the age of reason or those who never will. To be classed with infants, imbeciles, and domestic animals. But to be punished, however severely, because we have deserved it, because we ought to have known better, is to be treated as a human person made in God's image." Anyway, that's all I have for now. Until next time.